My name is Charlotte Papacosma, and my project is the effect of the urban water cycle on microplastic counts. I chose this project because microplastics are an increasingly large problem across the world, and I wanted to see how big of an issue they were in my community specifically. Turns out they're in everything from source water in the Potomac to the drinking water coming out of our taps. Yes, you heard that right. There was an average of 11.5 microplastics per liter of tap water in each of my samples. So clearly, we've got a problem. Now, let me walk you through where and how I tested my samples. This is the urban water cycle, the 8-step process in which water is sent from its source through our homes and eventually back into the environment with the goal of removing most pollutants from our water. I tested from 4 of these steps: source, distribution, treatment or effluent, and discharge, otherwise known as the receiving surface water body, which in this case was 4 Mile Run. Once I had taken my samples, I brought them back and filtered them through this apparatus, which took about 5 hours per sample. So, as you can see, I spent quite a bit of time at this step of the process. Once the samples were filtered, I took the filter papers, which look like this, and analyzed them under a microscope for microplastics. Here are some examples of the microplastics I found. Once I'd counted the microplastics present on each filter paper, I set about analyzing the counts. As you can see in this graph, the location with the highest mean microplastic count was the effluent, or treated wastewater, from the Arlington Water Pollution Control Plant, with an average 59.5 microplastics per 1 quart of water, while the lowest count was in the tap water. In this graph, I evaluated the relationship between microplastic counts and the steps of the urban water cycle. The average microplastic count started out high at the source, then dropped to a much lower count in the tap water. It then rose to an even higher count than was in the source in the effluent sample, presumably due to dumping, laundering, and industry processes. And finally, it dropped in the receiving surface water body, most likely due to dilution. Lastly, in this graph, I wanted to investigate how the effluent sample compared to the 4 Mile Run samples from before and after the effluent water enters the stream. The average microplastic count started out low in the upstream 4 Mile Run sample, and then after the effluent entered the stream, the count for the downstream sample location rose. However, these results are nowhere near conclusive. There were several sources of uncertainty in this experiment. Firstly, the urban water cycle is not a closed system, meaning that there are many possible contaminants that can't be traced to their origins. It also means that the samples can't be tracked throughout the cycle as water is free moving. Because of this, the microplastic counts weren't directly related, and so the microplastic counts and the relationships between them are only possible trends and not conclusive correlations. Next, only 2 samples were taken at each location. I had originally intended to take at least 3, but I quickly realized this wouldn't be possible considering my time frame because, as I said earlier, the samples each took an extremely long time to filter. Additionally, the samples were only taken on one day, and so the data doesn't represent how microplastics vary with weather and time changes. And finally, the method I used to count the microplastics with my eyes instead of using a computer program that recognizes and counts microplastics was very subjective, because as with many experiments, false positives and negatives are always a possibility. Microplastics are becoming an increasingly big concern, but a very difficult one to solve due to their pervasiveness. With this data, I hope to add to pre-existing knowledge about microplastics and spread awareness about the reality of the microplastic crisis and how we can do our part to solve it. Thank you.